There are moments in life when the people closest to you seem to shift, when something in their words or actions no longer aligns with the heart you once knew. It's in those moments that discernment becomes more than a virtue, it becomes a shield. Not every battle arrives with thunder. Not every spiritual assault comes from the outside. Sometimes the enemy whispers through familiar voices, hoping you're too comfortable, too trusting, too distracted to notice. But you were not created to walk blindly. You were created with the ability to discern truth from deception, light from darkness, peace from counterfeit comfort. Discernment begins with recognizing the fruit. When someone near you consistently breeds confusion, unrest, or temptation, it's not merely a personality flaw, it may be a spiritual pressure working through them. The enemy loves subtlety. He cloaks his influence in casual comments, small compromises, and emotional manipulation. But when the atmosphere shifts around someone, when you feel drained instead of strengthened, pulled away from purpose rather than pushed toward it, something deeper may be at work. You must learn to listen not only to the words spoken, but to the spirit behind them. There are also moments when those you love begin encouraging decisions that move you away from truth. They shrug at sin, laugh at conviction, or belittle the stirring you feel from God. Don't overlook these signs. The enemy doesn't always roar. Sometimes he influences through apathy, distraction, or encouragement toward paths that lead away from your calling. Yet, discernment is not about suspicion, it's about spiritual clarity. It's not about judging the person, it's about recognizing the influence. And once you see the influence, you're called to respond with wisdom, not fear. Your greatest safeguard is intimacy with God. The closer you draw to Him, the louder deception becomes. Darkness trembles around those anchored in truth. When you carry light, anything hidden around you eventually reveals itself, not because you're searching for darkness, but because darkness cannot remain comfortable around someone who refuses to compromise. And as you walk in that clarity, remember that your role is not to condemn, but to intercede. Sometimes the very people influenced by darkness are the ones God intends you to pray for most fervently. Strength doesn't come from avoiding battles, but from recognizing them before they reach your doorstep. And discernment is the gift that allows you to stand firm, protect your spirit, guard your purpose, and walk confidently even when familiar faces carry unfamiliar shadows. Here are 5 main keynotes that capture the core message of the speech. Discernment protects you from hidden spiritual influence. True spiritual discernment is essential because not every threat comes from outside your circle. Sometimes negative influences can operate through those closest to you. 2. Look beyond words and examine the spiritual fruit. Consistent confusion, unrest, or temptation coming from someone is often a sign of deeper spiritual pressure, not just personality or mood. 3. The enemy works subtly through familiar voices. Darkness often hides in subtle compromises, emotional manipulation, or encouragement to drift away from truth, making it crucial to discern the spirit behind actions. 4. Intimacy with God reveals what's hidden. The closer you walk with God, the easier it becomes to recognize deception. Light exposes what darkness tries to disguise. 5. Your response is not judgment, but wisdom and intercession. Recognizing spiritual influence doesn't mean condemning people. It means guarding your heart, standing firm, and praying for those affected. Discernment is not something that appears in a single moment of crisis. It grows quietly in the depths of your spirit as you learn to walk closely with God. When you talk about protecting yourself from hidden spiritual influence, you are really talking about cultivating the kind of spiritual sensitivity that alerts you long before a situation becomes dangerous. Many people assume that spiritual attacks come only from obvious sources, strangers, enemies, or openly harmful environments. But the truth is, the enemy often chooses the places where your guard is naturally lowered. He whispers through familiarity because he knows you are more likely to overlook what does not look threatening. That is why discernment becomes your shield, the inner voice that warns you when something is not what it seems, even when it comes from someone you have laughed with, trusted, or confided in for years. This kind of discernment is not paranoia, it is spiritual awareness. It recognizes that people, even those you love, can sometimes become vessels of influence without realizing it. A harsh word spoken in frustration, a suggestion made without careful thought, or pressure to compromise your values, these may not be intentional attacks, yet they can still be used by darkness if they lead you away from your calling. Discernment helps you catch those moments before they take root in your heart. It teaches you to filter every influence, not through suspicion, but through truth. It asks you to pay attention to the fruit that surrounds you. Does this person push you closer to God or quietly pull you away? Do their words anchor you in peace or leave you feeling unsettled? Do they inspire purpose or feed your doubts? The answers to those questions reveal more than you may realize. Discernment also protects you from emotional vulnerability. When you deeply care for someone, your heart is open, and open hearts are easy targets. The enemy often uses emotional connections to slip unhealthy patterns into your life. Maybe it comes as guilt, where someone close manipulates your kindness. Maybe it appears as pressure, where a friend encourages you to follow a path you know is spiritually unsafe. Maybe it shows up in subtle mockery, the kind that makes you second-guess your convictions. Discernment is the quiet strength that rises inside you and says, "This is not leading me toward truth." It empowers you to draw boundaries without bitterness, to speak truth without fear, and to love people without letting their influence replace God's voice in your life. Another layer of protection discernment offers is the ability to identify spiritual atmospheres. Sometimes you can feel a shift around someone long before you can explain it. You feel spiritually drained around them, or your peace disappears when they walk into the room. Discernment teaches you to pay attention to those shifts. The Spirit often senses danger before the mind understands it. When you learn to trust that inner prompting, you begin to avoid traps that others walk into blindly. You start to recognize when someone's words do not match their spirit, when their smile hides a harmful motive, or when their advice is wrapped in subtle deception. Discernment allows you to walk through relationships with clarity, not confusion. Most importantly, discernment keeps your heart aligned with the truth. As long as you stay anchored in God, no hidden influence can easily take hold. It is the closeness of your walk with Him that sharpens your spiritual vision. The more you grow in truth, the more uncomfortable lies become. The more you grow in light, the more obvious darkness becomes, even when it hides behind familiar faces. Discernment does not make you fearful, it makes you confident. It allows you to love boldly, protect yourself wisely, and recognize that spiritual battles often come disguised as everyday interactions. By cultivating discernment, you build a shield around your spirit, one that guards you against influence that seeks to drain your strength, weaken your conviction, or distract you from the purpose God has placed within you. Looking beyond words and examining spiritual fruit requires a deeper kind of awareness, one that does not settle for the surface or the appearance of things. It is easy to listen to what people say, especially when their tone is comforting or familiar, but words alone can be deceiving. Someone may speak kindly, yet leave you feeling spiritually empty. Someone may offer advice that sounds logical, yet nudges you away from truth. That is why the true measure of a person's influence is not found in their language, but in the fruit their presence consistently produces in your life. Spiritual fruit never lies. It reveals the condition of the heart behind the voice, the atmosphere behind the actions, and the intention behind the smile. When you learn to evaluate fruit instead of words, you step into a realm of clarity that protects your heart from manipulation and your soul from unseen spiritual harm. Every interaction you have with someone leaves a trace. It may strengthen your peace, or it may disturb it. It may push you toward God, or it may quietly pull you away. These traces accumulate over time, creating patterns that reveal the truth about the influence someone carries. If the consistent outcome of being around a person is confusion, emotional heaviness, temptation, or spiritual distraction, then something deeper is happening, something that can't be brushed aside as personality or circumstance. The enemy often uses familiar voices to plant seeds of doubt or compromise, but those seeds always produce predictable fruit. Confusion, unrest, cynicism, emotional exhaustion, and a weakened sense of purpose are all signs that the influence surrounding you may not be from God. Recognizing these patterns is not about labeling a person as good or bad. It is about understanding what their presence produces in your spirit. The fruit test also reveals the difference between temporary emotion and lasting impact. A friend may offer comfort in a difficult moment, but if their long-term influence encourages you to ignore conviction, neglect prayer, or compromise values, the fruit is unhealthy. Someone may appear harmless, yet every conversation with them leads you further from the clarity you once held. They may speak well, but their presence dims your light. That is the power of subtle influence. It doesn't attack directly, it erodes slowly. Discernment grows when you learn to pause after your interactions and ask yourself, what did this conversation plant in me? Peace or anxiety? Strength or doubt? Conviction or compromise? Light or heaviness? The answers are spiritual indicators, revealing whether the fruit is nourishing or toxic. Looking at fruit also protects you from emotional entanglement. When you care about someone, your heart naturally wants to defend them, excuse them, or overlook behavior that is spiritually damaging. But the fruit reveals the truth even when your emotions resist it. Someone you love may unintentionally carry influence that draws you away from who you are meant to be. They may encourage habits that weaken your spirit or distract you from your calling. They may normalize attitudes that numb your sensitivity to God. If the fruit is harmful, then the influence is harmful, regardless of how close the person is. This doesn't mean you stop loving them. It means you stop allowing their influence to guide you. Spiritual fruit also reveals intentions. A person can smile at you while being envious of your progress. They can offer advice while masking resentment. They can pretend to support you while quietly hoping you fail. But their fruit exposes them. Gossip, jealousy, pressure to compromise, subtle discouragement, and emotional manipulation are all signs of deeper issues. You are not called to judge the heart, but you are called to guard yours. And guarding your heart requires paying attention to the fruit people consistently produce around you. When you begin to measure influence by fruit, you step into spiritual maturity. You learn to separate charm from truth, familiarity from safety, and personality from spiritual impact. You stop accepting confusion as normal and start recognizing it as a warning sign. You stop ignoring the heaviness you feel and begin acknowledging it as a signal from your spirit. Words may soothe, but fruit reveals. And when you learn to examine fruit, you protect your purpose, your peace, and your walk with God from influences that were never meant to shape you. The enemy rarely announces himself with dramatic threats or obvious darkness. Instead, he works quietly, weaving his influence through familiar voices that you would never think to question. This is why subtlety is one of his greatest weapons. When someone you love speaks, your heart is open, your guard is down, and your trust is high. That familiarity creates a doorway, and the enemy often chooses those very moments to plant thoughts that seem harmless on the surface but carry spiritual weight beneath them. A simple comment encouraging you to compromise, a soft laugh at your convictions, a gentle suggestion that pulls you in a direction you know is not right. These moments may appear small, but they can shape your spiritual trajectory if left unchecked. The danger is not in the loud voices, but in the soft ones, the ones that sound safe simply because they come from people you know. These subtle influences can come through emotional manipulation as well. Sometimes people you care about use guilt or pressure without realizing they are being guided by unhealthy forces. They may insist that you should stay quiet when you need to speak truth. They may urge you to fit in when your spirit is calling you to stand apart. They may encourage you to indulge in behavior that weakens your spiritual strength, all because it makes them more comfortable. Not every person doing these things is aware of the spiritual currents flowing through them. That is why you must discern the influence, not attack the individual. The enemy loves to hide behind emotional ties because he knows that when your heart is involved, your clarity can become clouded. Subtle influence also appears in the form of small compromises. The enemy does not usually tempt you to leap off a cliff. He nudges you a few steps away from the edge of truth, one tiny shift at a time. Maybe someone tells you that prayer can wait, that reading the Word is not urgent, that obeying God is optional if it seems inconvenient. Perhaps they make you feel silly for wanting to live righteously or accuse you of being too serious about your spiritual life. These are not accidents. These are calculated whispers meant to soften your convictions until they no longer feel like convictions at all. And because the voice speaking them is familiar, you may be tempted to accept the suggestion without realizing the spiritual consequences. This is why it is essential to pay attention to the direction someone's influence pushes you, even when their intentions appear innocent. Subtle influence often disguises itself as concern. A friend or family member may warn you against pursuing something God has called you to, claiming they want to protect you. But if their words stir fear instead of faith, hesitation instead of boldness, or doubt instead of trust, then the influence is not coming from a place aligned with truth. The enemy knows exactly how to cloak fear in compassionate language. He knows how to wrap discouragement in the tone of friendship. He knows how to make a spiritual attack sound like a caring suggestion. When you learn to recognize that fear-driven influence is never from God, even when spoken by someone you love, you begin to see through the deception and reclaim your spiritual clarity. Another form of subtle influence is spiritual numbness. Some people indirectly encourage you to lower your standards simply because they have lowered theirs. They normalize compromise and invite you to join them. They make light of things you know are spiritually dangerous. They lead you to believe that holiness is outdated or unnecessary. Their presence slowly dulls your sensitivity to the Spirit, leaving you feeling disconnected from the passion you once had. This form of influence is dangerous because it rarely feels like an attack. It feels like bonding, like belonging, like blending in. But blending in with spiritually unhealthy voices always leads you away from purpose. The key is understanding that subtle influence does not announce itself, it infiltrates. It arrives quietly, hides in familiar tones, and wraps itself in the comfort of relationship. That is why you must listen not just to the sound of the voice, but to the spirit behind it. Every word spoken over your life either strengthens your walk or weakens it. Every influence either aligns with truth or subtly opposes it. When you become aware of how the enemy uses familiar voices to plant seeds of compromise, you reclaim authority over your heart. You step into a place where clarity overrides emotion, where truth overrides comfort, and where spiritual maturity allows you to discern even the quietest whisper that seeks to pull you off the path God has prepared for you. Intimacy with God is the foundation of all true discernment, because the closer you draw to Him, the more clearly you begin to see everything around you. The presence of God sharpens your spiritual senses in a way nothing else can. You begin to notice things that once blended into the background of your daily life. Conversations that you used to shrug off suddenly feel heavy. Situations you once overlooked now reveal spiritual motives beneath the surface. When you walk closely with God, your spirit becomes tuned to His voice, and anything that does not reflect His character becomes unmistakably out of place. What once looked normal becomes uncomfortable. What once sounded harmless becomes spiritually loud. This clarity does not come from suspicion, it comes from the light of God illuminating what darkness tries to hide. The presence of God exposes deception not by increasing your fear, but by increasing your sensitivity to truth. His voice becomes the standard by which every other voice is measured. When someone speaks words that carry a spirit of confusion, fear, manipulation, or compromise, your spirit recognizes immediately that something is off. You may not have the vocabulary for it, but you feel the dissonance. That feeling is not anxiety, it is discernment. It is the Spirit alerting you that the influence behind those words is not aligned with the heart of God. The closer you are to Him, the faster you recognize when something tries to pull you away from His path. Light does not need to search for darkness, it simply exposes it by being present. When you carry the light of intimacy with God, hidden influences become visible without you needing to investigate them. Intimacy with God also strengthens your convictions, making it difficult for deception to take hold. When you are rooted in His truth, the enemy cannot easily twist Scripture, distort your purpose, or confuse your emotions. You begin to understand the difference between voices that push you toward righteousness and voices that lure you into compromise. Even subtle lies lose their power because truth is not just something you know, it becomes something you live. It becomes the filter through which every relationship, every conversation, every influence must pass. When you spend time with God, your discernment upgrades from something you try to use to something that naturally flows from within you. It becomes instinctive, like a spiritual reflex that constantly directs you toward what is pure and away from what is harmful. There is also a purity that surrounds those who walk intimately with God. People with hidden motives feel unsettled around them. Spirits that thrive in deception become uncomfortable. Environments that once welcomed you suddenly react differently because the presence you carry disrupts hidden intentions. This is why some people may distance themselves from you or treat you differently when you grow spiritually. It is not always personal, it is spiritual. Darkness cannot remain comfortable where light refuses to compromise. When intimacy with God becomes your lifestyle, you create an atmosphere around you that exposes falsehood without you having to say a word. Even silence can shine when it is filled with His presence. Intimacy with God also empowers you to respond with wisdom instead of emotion. When someone close to you is influenced by darkness, your first instinct might be to react out of anger, hurt, or confusion. But walking closely with God gives you patience, clarity, and strength. You begin to see the situation not just through your own eyes, but through His. You recognize that the person is not your enemy, the influence behind them is. Instead of attacking the person, you pray for them. Instead of withdrawing in fear, you stand firm in truth. Instead of allowing their influence to weaken you, you allow God's presence to strengthen you. This kind of maturity only comes from consistent communion with Him, from conversations in prayer where He softens your heart and strengthens your spirit. Ultimately, intimacy with God creates a spiritual atmosphere around your life that makes deception visible, compromise uncomfortable, and darkness powerless. It equips you with a kind of discernment that protects you long before the enemy ever reaches your doorstep. The more time you spend with God, the more His voice becomes your compass, His truth becomes your guardrail, and His presence becomes your protection. Through intimacy, you develop the clarity to recognize deception, the strength to resist it, and the wisdom to rise above it without losing compassion for the people around you. Recognizing spiritual influence in the people around you is never meant to lead you into judgment, bitterness, or suspicion. Instead, it calls you into a deeper place of wisdom, compassion, and intercession. When you become aware that someone close to you may be under a negative spiritual influence, the natural human response is often frustration or offense. But spiritual maturity teaches you to see beyond the outward behavior and understand the unseen battle behind it. People are not the enemy. They may be affected, influenced, pressured, or spiritually weakened, but the enemy working through them is the true culprit. And once you understand that, your response shifts from emotional reaction to spiritual responsibility. Wisdom allows you to protect your heart without hardening it. It teaches you where to set healthy boundaries and how to maintain spiritual strength while still extending love. You don't allow harmful influence to control you, but you also don't allow your heart to turn cold. Wisdom knows when to speak and when to stay silent. It knows when to engage and when to distance. It knows how to stand firm without becoming defensive. Instead of arguing with a person who is under spiritual pressure, wisdom leads you to anchor yourself in truth and refuse to be drawn into their struggle. Sometimes the best defense is simply not participating in the drama the enemy is trying to stir through another person. Intercession becomes your most powerful response. When you pray for someone influenced by darkness, you engage in the real battle, the one happening in the spiritual realm. Prayer breaks chains that arguments cannot. It softens hearts that conversations cannot reach. It exposes deception that human reasoning cannot uncover. When you pray, you are not just hoping for change. You are inviting the presence of God to intervene in ways you cannot. Intercession is not weakness, it is spiritual warfare carried out from a place of authority. It is your way of standing in the gap for those who cannot yet see the influence affecting them. Instead of condemning them for the darkness around them, prayer invites God to bring light into their situation. Responding with wisdom also means protecting your peace. You cannot allow someone else's turmoil to become your atmosphere. When you notice that their behavior is consistently draining, confusing, or pulling you away from spiritual clarity, wisdom teaches you to step back, breathe, and let God handle what you cannot. This is not abandonment, it is stewardship of your own soul. You were never meant to carry battles that do not belong to you. You can pray, you can love, you can encourage, but you cannot fix spiritual issues through human effort. Some battles are won only through surrender to God, not through striving with people. Intercession reminds you that God can reach people in ways you never could. He can open their eyes, convict their hearts, calm their minds, and remove the weight of darkness in a moment. Your prayers, spoken in faith, invite heaven into their lives even when they don't realize they need it. This is why discernment is never meant to make you fearful or judgmental. It is meant to make you a warrior in prayer. When you recognize a negative influence, you step into your role as a spiritual protector, not by controlling the person, but by covering them in prayer and refusing to be pulled into the enemy's tactics. At the same time, wisdom teaches you responsibility. You are not called to rescue every person, absorb every burden, or allow every influence near your spirit. Some people require distance for your safety, and that is not unloving, it is necessary. But even from a distance, you can pray. You can bless. You can speak life. That is the balance of spiritual maturity, firm boundaries paired with a soft heart. In the end, recognizing spiritual influence is not about elevating yourself above others. It is about responding in a way that honors God, protects your spirit, and opens the door for healing in the lives of those affected. Wisdom keeps you grounded. Intercession keeps you compassionate. Together, they allow you to walk through relationships with discernment, strength, and love, guarded but never hardened, aware but never afraid, strong, yet still tender enough to pray for those who need it most. Here is a strong, powerful conclusion to tie the entire speech together in the same tone and style you've been using. When you learn to see with spiritual eyes, you stop walking through life unprotected. You stop mistaking personality for influence, convenience for clarity, and familiarity for safety. You begin recognizing that every voice carries a direction, every relationship carries a weight, and every atmosphere carries a spirit. And when God opens your eyes to the unseen battles surrounding you, it is not to make you fearful, it is to make you prepared. You were never meant to live in confusion. You were never meant to be blindsided by hidden motives or quiet spiritual attacks. You were created to stand in truth, walk in wisdom, and carry a light that no darkness can disguise itself against. Discernment doesn't isolate you, it empowers you. It teaches you how to love without losing yourself, how to help without being harmed, and how to walk among people without absorbing the influence that seeks to pull you away from your purpose. And as you grow in wisdom, intimacy with God becomes your anchor. His presence becomes your compass. His truth becomes your shield. The more you walk with Him, the more you will recognize what is from Him and what is not. And once you learn to see clearly, you will never again be easily deceived by the enemy's subtle attempts. So walk boldly. Walk with a guarded heart and a softened spirit. Walk with eyes wide open and a faith that refuses to be shaken. Not everyone who stands beside you carries light, but the one who walks within you carries all the light you will ever need. Stay close to Him. Stay anchored in truth, and you will always recognize the difference between a friend who lifts you toward your calling and an influence that tries to pull you away from it. And in that clarity, you will find strength, discernment, and the unshakable peace of knowing that God Himself is guiding your every step.